Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I will be doing a top 10 series on my favorite author in media tie-in fiction, John Jackson Miller. I want to start out this video by saying that normally on Fridays I have my Star Trek retrospective series that I've been doing for the last couple of weeks, and that has been put on a hold this week. It'll continue next Friday. I just thought that this would be a good time to put in this video to talk about Star Wars content, since it's been a while. But I'm going to go back to Star Trek retrospectives eventually. But I think you'll like this video today. I'm talking about John Jackson Miller. He is my favorite tie-in author. He's not my favorite author of all fiction or of any type of genre, but specifically when it comes to tie-in genre. Now, if you've watched me on the channel, you probably know what a tie-in author is, but if you don't, a brief answer is that tie-in authors write fiction for an already previously established universe. Such as Star Wars or Star Trek, and those are the two I'll be talking about mostly today. Someone like Kevin J. Anderson writes for the Dune universe. His Dune books are tie-in books because they're tying into the Dune universe. Things that if there are 24 novels connected to the 24 television series, you could write a novel for NCIS. I know that there are Buffy the Vampire Slayers. If there's a previously established IP and your novels are connecting to that IP, that's tie-in fiction. It's my favorite type of fiction, to be honest. And so today I'm talking about John Jackson Miller's top 10. He does have one book on here that's not a tie-in book, that is just an original science fiction novel, which I'll get to. But other than that, he primarily does tie-in fiction, and he's really great. All of his books are worth checking out. But to begin with, I'll talk about my number 10, which is The Lost Tribe of the Sith, The Collected Stories. This is a collection of short stories and one novella, which was released in 2012, but they were written, in the years beforehand, tying into the Fate of the Jedi series. This collection discusses how the tribe got lost, hence the title. It describes how the tribe got lost, and it explores what they did when they first reached the planet. And what makes this book interesting is it explores many, many themes of what is a Sith supposed to do without the collective, without everyone else. What would a Jedi supposed to be do during that time? And it shows how the Sith are they're just some despicable members. And there are also some interesting, really sweet members of the Sith collective. But the Sith in this book are absolutely fantastic to read about. There are some major twists and some surprises that are absolutely fun to read. It has some maps in the beginning invoking that kind of J.R.R. Tolkien type of literature. It's such a fun book to read, and I highly recommend it to anyone, especially if you're a Star Wars fan. But as I said earlier, B41, it is a collection of stories, so it is not a straight novel, but they are all interconnected and they are all kind of linear. So it kind of could be seen as one big story that he's telling. The second book on my list that I'll be discussing, which is my number 9 in my ranking, is Overdraft, the Orion Offensive. This is John Jackson Miller's sole novel. And Mr. Miller, if you happen to be watching this, please write more in this series because it's awesome and I love reading it. This is a standalone kind of science fiction novel set in the future where Earth and the humans have basically become big business people, and we're all about trading with aliens. And the way this book is pitched is aliens and armored mercenaries take on Wall Street. And this guy is trying to set up this expedition, and he accidentally bankrupts it. And all of a sudden, all the people who are working for him get really mad at him, and so they basically force this guy to go out and go on the front lines and make first contact with all these species to try to get them to sell the goods to these species and to get the species to, not kill them on their arrival. And so it's got some of that Star Trek First Contact level of fun to it, and it's a really soft sci-fi, so it's not all about the hard, the magic or the world building. It's just about the fun concept of a Wall Street-based person being forced to go on the front lines of First Contact. I have highly enjoyed reading this series. This was one of his first books of fiction. It is published by 47 North. There are not many copies of this that I know of. It was very hard to find a copy. But I still think this is a highly enjoyable book. My issues with it primarily come from some of the language choices that he made in the book, which I don't think match with the rest of his fiction. But as a whole, it was written as a serialized book, originally ebook, and then it became a physical copy. So we have gotten 2 books and still haven't gotten to one that was just traditionally published in the normal type of way yet. But getting to my number 8 on my list, I have The Enterprise War, which is from the Star Trek Discovery line. Now, before you turn off this video, I should preface this by saying I do not care for Star Trek Discovery, but I love this book and some of the other Discovery books. I found that Star Trek in particular, and John Jackson Miller's works, have made me appreciate the property more, particularly when it comes to Discovery and Picard. The Enterprise War is the 5th book in the Discovery line, but it really is completely standalone. The idea is, in Discovery Season 2, the Enterprise shows up, and you're like, wait a second, where were you during this big war that was happening? And this book explains it. Now, some of the pros of this book are that it feels so awesome to read about the Enterprise crew with Pike and with Spock and with others well before the events of the original series. This is even, during Discovery's time, which is way early. And so it's a very fun book in that sense, and it's very standalone. So if you just want a quick story, this is good for that. However, one thing that this does is he nails the characters as they are in the show. If you've watched Discovery Season 2, this book came out right after it, but it was written before the show was released. And so, obviously, Miller did not have everything to pull from, and yet he was able to nail the characters in it. And so, I think that this book is Miller's lead up to writing some Strange New Worlds novels for the new TV show that's coming out featuring all these characters. And if this book is any indicator, it's well worth it. The only downside of the book is that the ending is kind of forgettable, in my opinion, compared to some of his other really epic endings. And so, but it's still a really good book. You can see my copies are very worn because they're very much well loved and read. The number 7 book, hopping back into a different universe for Star Wars, is Knight Errant. Now, this may be his deepest, most thought-provoking book that he's written. And what makes this just such an amazing book is that it explores the differences between the different types of Sith that exist and the different types of Jedi. The different types of Sith very much mirror the concept of when you have the different types of communism. Communism in Russia is different from communism in China, which is different from communism in North Korea. And so it explores all those different types of Sith and why they're fighting each other, even though they're all Sith. Why would you fight each other when you have a common enemy, which is the Jedi, which represent capitalism? Well, he explains really well in here why that would happen. And he shows this young this young Jedi Knight, Kara Holt, and what she does is she's basically tracking these Sith, trying to hunt them down without the help of the other Jedi. And much like all of John Jackson Miller's other Star Wars books, this book asks, what does a Jedi do when they're alone? And it just does a fantastic job with it. I love the twists in this book, and I love the action. This was his first full-length prose novel to be released, and I feel like it has some... it shows that he wasn't quite as well developed yet at the time, so his word choice at times, the flow of his narrative wasn't his best yet, but I certainly think it's a very excellent book. Very underrated, and as far as I know, only has paperback copies, which blows my mind. I wish I had a hardcover, but they only have paperback copies. The next book on my list, which is book number 6, I believe. already starting to lose count, going crazy, is Star Trek Picard Rogue Elements. Again, I didn't care for the TV show Star Trek Picard. I thought that they did, in my opinion, a disservice to the characters. The way that some people feel about The Last Jedi for Star Wars, which I disagree with, but the way that a lot of people feel about that is the way that I feel about Picard. And yet, this book is utterly fantastic. It follows the character Cristobal Rios and some adventures he has before Picard. It ties into The Next Generation. It ties into the original series. It ties into the original movies, which blew my mind. One of my favorite movies of all time is also one of my favorite Star Trek movies, which is The Undiscovered Country. And there's a huge tie-in to The Undiscovered Country in this book. And I remember I was reading this a few months ago, and I was like, whoa, that's so cool. This book deals with the question of redemption. Can someone be redeemed after they've done some horrible things if they truly believe that they're repentant? And so it deals with the idea of repentance and redemption well. It also deals with the themes of moral questions about commerce and moral questions about working with people who have a different worldview than you. And I think that this book just asks some great worldview questions. I do have a review of this book on my channel. It's one of my first ever videos that I've ever recorded. So check that out if you're interested in more on this book. This book, I would say, has a bit of a fault in that it uses the same type of explicit language that Picard used, and other explicit content that was very much not appreciated. But still, other than that, fantastic book. All right, we're getting into the top 5. These are awesome books. They're all well worth the read, and they're also just, they're some of the best in the genre of both Star Trek and Star Wars. So to get into my number 5, I have Die Standing, which is a Discovery novel. It's the 7th Discovery book. This one deals with Philippa Georgiou. Please don't ask me how to spell it because it's crazy spelling, but Philippa Georgiou, and it's not the Philippa Georgiou that we know, it is the Emperor Georgiou from the Mirror Universe. And so there's a lot of ties to the Mirror Universe in this book. It explains what happened after she took after the end of season 1 of Discovery. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't finished that season, but what this book does is, at the time that I read this book, I had not finished season 1 of Discovery, and yet John Jackson Miller was able to fill me in on all of the information that I needed to know. And this book, more than his other Star Trek books that I've referenced up until this point, tells just a fantastic plot. This book is just such a fun book to read, and it shows Philippa Georgiou trying to build her potential empire in the future while at the same time working as kind of a spy for Section 31. And there's also a Dax that shows up in this book, which is great, who becomes one of the main characters. And this book has some fantastic comic relief, some truly hilarious comic relief in one of its characters. And so this book, I think, of the 3 he wrote in the new Trek era of Enterprise War, Rogue Elements, and Die Standing. I think Die Standing's the one where he hit every single thing he needed to hit. It was just superbly well done. Next, my number 4 book that I'll be discussing is A New Dawn, which is a Rebels novel, which was the first ever canon book for Star Wars, and it follows Kanan and Hera, and it tells the story of their meeting and the inciting incident of them starting a rebellion. And what this book does is it is able to explain backstory without feeling like you need to have read the book in order to understand the show. But if you watch the show, you will appreciate the book better. And I think that this just makes for some fantastic plots. This has the best Star Wars villain, and I will stand by that. The best Star Wars villain, Count Vidian. Very underused, should be in every other project, sadly he's not, and he's just wonderful. This book has the first appearance of Ray Sloan, who is very prominent in the later Star Trek Star Trek. I knew that was going to happen eventually. Star Wars canon novels. She's very important, and just he paved the way. He showed how canon was going to work, which is to say that you're just doing your job as an author. You're tying in, you're not overriding, you're just trying to do exactly what you've been told and do it well. And he absolutely does that here. And it has a wonderful foreword by Dave Filoni in this book, which is extra fun. All right, getting into my number 3 book by John Jackson Miller is Takedown. This is John Jackson Miller's first Star Trek novel. It is a standalone book in the it's a Next Generation book, at least according to the cover, but in actuality it's a crossover book between Next Generation and DS9, because one of the prominent ships in this book is the Aventine. And basically Riker, who has become an admiral at this point, Admiral Riker takes over the Aventine and starts doing some weird stuff. And nobody knows why, not even his family. And so Captain Picard is sent to chase Riker to find him and hunt him down, but Picard doesn't want to kill his former first officer. His friend will, and this book shows him the chase between the two, and it's just a fun adventure caper, and it shows Picard and Riker at their best. It has a lot of elements about the Cold War to it, which are fantastically done. And so I would highly recommend this particular book to anyone who's a Star Trek fan who wants to get into Star Trek books. Even though a lot has happened recently, he fills in all of the necessary detail in this book. He will make it so that you understand what you need to understand. And so I highly recommend it. This is my number 3. Just everything about it's fantastic. Then my number 2, you may call this a cop-out, but I don't believe it is a cop-out. But anyway, this is the Star Trek Prey trilogy. I'm counting it as 1 because I couldn't decide which one is my favorite, although I know the answer now that I've been thinking about it for so long. But this trilogy really is very cohesive, and it feels like one epic big, like this could be one book that's 9 acts. But sadly, it's not. That way. I don't think they're ever going to make an omnibus of this book, but I wish they would because it's just so good. This is on the level, if not to me, this is better than the Star Trek Destiny trilogy or The Fall or anything like that. I have recently done a full retrospective on the Prey series, which just released recently. I would check that out if you want more further information. The basics are... this is a Klingon-based story, but this spans the Next Generation and the original series crew. You're going back and forth between the timelines, and basically, someone survives, and from the Klingons from Star Trek 3 and Star Trek 6, and this Klingon decides to end the Khitomer Accords and wants to make the Klingons awesome again. And he wants to make the Klingons their own independent group and fight against the Federation and make them awesome. And yeah, Klingons. And nobody else likes that. The Federation does not want that to happen. They love the Khitomer Accords. And so this book takes a Star Trek 6 plot and puts it in the events of the Next Generation. And of course, as I mentioned earlier with Rogue Elements, John Jackson Miller does a fantastic job tying in the Star Trek movies as well, and so there's lots of movie references in this. They have some great covers in this trilogy, and it's a full crossover trilogy featuring the original series, Next Generation, Deep Space Nine gets involved in here. Some of the Voyager crew members are involved. It's a true epic crossover in the biggest sense of the terms, and it's the one Star Trek trilogy that delivers and even does more than it delivers, and I feel like many of the other Star Trek series don't. They don't deliver fully, and so that's why this is my number 2. It is nearly flawless. It is a fantastic trilogy, well worth the read for anyone. And this was my first Star Trek series I ever read, and it still holds up. Now for my number 1. If you know who John Jackson Miller is, you will know him for one book, most likely, and so it will not come as a surprise to anyone when I say that my favorite Star Trek or Star Wars, or really any novel by John Jackson Miller, is Kenobi. This is, I think, his magnum opus. Even though this was one of his first books, when we think about him 50 years from now, we're going to say, oh my goodness, he wrote the best Star Wars book of all time. And I think that not only is this the best Star Wars book, but if we're just talking about literature, it's one of the best books I've ever read. This book takes the Western themes and puts them in Star Wars. And you might say, oh, like The Mandalorian. This was before The Mandalorian. And what this book truly does is it doubles down and focuses it. You have the Tusken Raiders take the place of the natives. You have a cantina type place in the Oasis and Danar's claim that takes the place of the saloon. And you have, instead of the sheriff, you have Oren Galt. And you have the ranger who is Kenobi. And this book explores immediately after the events of Revenge of the Sith, and it says, what was Obi-Wan doing on Tatooine? There's a couple camps of people, those who believe that Kenobi should leave Tatooine, that's the Timothy Zahn camp, and then there's those who think Kenobi shouldn't leave Tatooine, and that's the John Jackson Miller camp. I happen to be in this camp, that I believe that he shouldn't leave Tatooine, but the new show he probably will, so it's okay. But in this book, he doesn't leave Tatooine. There's no space battles in this book. There's no space in this book. It's just focused on Tatooine, and it is such a fun read. It is such a quick read. The meditations in this book are brilliant. It made me laugh. At points, it made me cry. There are some hilarious references to the prequel trilogy. There's also just some fantastic dialogue and some amazing themes regarding the Tuskens and regarding forgiveness with them, and also regarding what I talked about in every book has to do with what a Jedi should do when they're alone. This is the exact book discussing that. There's a crate dragon involved in this book. It just gives you everything. It's just fantastic, and so I would say that this is, if you read one John Jackson Miller book, read this one, but also read all of his others because they're all good. But this is just, I think it's his best. There's always the potential he could make a novel that is better than this, and I think he will eventually. But for right now, this is his best, and it's my favorite, and I cannot wait to read more from him. It has been now 7 years since A New Dawn released, and since he's done a full-length novel for Star Wars. And Mr. Miller, if you're watching still at this point, which first of all, thank you. Wow, you've been watching a while. If you're fans, if you're just watching this video and you're not John Jackson Miller, just thank you for watching this long, because this is one of my longest videos I've ever made. But if you are watching Mr. Miller, please come back to Star Wars. We love your Star Wars books. We love your Star Trek books. Keep writing. And so if you have questions about where to start with his books, or if you want to let me know what your ranking is, if you've read any of his books, if there's a book on here I didn't include that you think I should include, let me know. I didn't include comics or short stories, but hey, some of them are great. All of them are great. So let me know down in the comments below your thoughts. Please subscribe to the channel and like this video and hit the notification bell. But until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.